Hi, this is Chaotic Studios, and you're listening to The Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tale of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 2 begins with Achillea just having entered the Iron Tower. Once inside, she quickly learns that the ugly gnome she met at the door is not the person she's looking for, but merely that person's servant. The real master turns out to be a wizard named Fimgrim Etresh, Fim for short. Fim is big in every way. He's 4 times Achillea's weight, and full of vigor, energy, and good humor. The two of them sit and talk over tea and cheese for a time. Fim claims not to have been aware of Altve's presence in the Vale, though he does not explain his business there. Before Achillea takes her leave, they exchange gifts. On the way home, Achillea frets over a notion that she had said too much and learned too little. But her worry is overridden by panic when she gets home to find that someone has broken into it. She races around the small dwelling, calling out for Altve and getting no response. In the bedroom, she finds an exploded glyph, and Achillea understands that it means her master's spellbook has been stolen. She next runs downstairs, finds some of her master's alchemical supplies have been disturbed, and finally finds Altve sitting on the floor, but he isn't moving. When Achillea reaches out to him, her fingers touch stone. Chapter 3, Part 1, Day 1, Early Evening. Mythic event meaning: oppress allies. Party status: Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points.
Oh no,
she breathed, blinking in disbelief.
Vapi, what has happened to you?
Achillea felt her eyes well up with tears. When she had touched his cheek, it had been cold, and she had yanked it away. Now she reached out again, sniffling. Every detail of his face and hair and clothing was exactly the way they had been when he had been. No, she couldn't say alive. That would imply that now he was dead. Something suddenly occurred to her, and she wiped the tears off her cheeks with the back of her hand.
Oak man,
she said, looking up at the carved wooden face of the construct. At her voice, it came to life, creaking and glowering down on her. The oak man did not have the power to speak, but by simple virtue of its animation, Achillea felt relief flood her heart. If Altve were dead, the construct would have ceased to live as well. Their spirits were interconnected, and, in the oak man's case, dependent. She felt a pang of shame, realizing she should have known this earlier. If Altve had been killed, Robin would have died as well. Cord too. Where was Cord? She suddenly wondered. More than Robin, and certainly more than the oak man, Cord might be able to shed some light on all this. Robin only had the intelligence of an animal, and the oak man, well, her earlier remark about him being more like a piece of furniture than a person was not entirely unwarranted. It was only semi-intelligent. Altve's enchantment could not make a construct that was both strong and smart. There was a trade-off. The oak man was all brawn, no brains. Achillea was about to go back up the stairs to look for Cord when something caught her eye. On the floor, beside her master, was a rolled-up piece of vellum. She picked it up and unfurled it. It was blank. She wrinkled her nose in confusion before rolling it back up and slipping it into her satchel.
I'll be right back,
she told the statue that was Altve, unaware of how close it was to the last thing she had said to him.
Oak man,
she began. The thing's wooden eyes regarded her, awaiting instruction.
Stay here. Guard Vapi.
The reply was a creaking nod. Not knowing what else to do, feeling a lump in her throat and her heart thudding in her breast, she turned and went back up the stairs. She passed through the living room, which still smelled of smoke, and then out the front door, where she almost collided with Cord.
Oh,
Said Achillea, startled, and then
thank Ahea, you're all right.
she threw her arms around the hard, spare wooden frame, and Cord returned the embrace, crossing his peg-like arms and gripping her little shoulders with his wooden hands. The two stood like that for a few moments, until Achillea had mastered her emotions.
Oh, Cord, did you see what they did to him?
Cord did not have the power of speech. His mouth was just painted on, but he tilted his torso forward in a bow that Achillea knew to be his way of nodding.
They turned him into stone. Did you see who did it?
Cord twisted his body back and forth. No, he hadn't.
Where were you?
By way of answer, Cord pointed behind him. On the path was a bundle of kindling. He must have been out collecting firewood when the intruder had come. Achillea scratched her chin as she tried to recall the details of her experience in the Iron Tower. How long had she sat with the fat wizard? What exactly had she told him? The tea he had given her. Hadn't it tasted a bit odd? That creepy gnome. It had greeted her at the door, served tea, and then she hadn't seen it again until she made to leave. Had she been there so long that it could have come here and attacked Vapi before returning? She shook her head. That wasn't even close to possible. Even if the gnome had sprinted both ways, and even if it had known exactly, she stiffened. Had she told them where they lived? No, she was quite sure she had not. She put a hand to her face and stifled a sob. There was too much going on. She couldn't think straight. What should she do? She gave voice to the first idea that came into her mind.
We have to go back to the tower.
Cord could not have known what she was talking about, but he made no protest, and the two of them started back along the footpath, hurrying down the incline of the vale in the direction of the river, and beyond that, the Iron Tower. A fluttering sound came from behind them as Robin flew from the earthen roof of their home and landed on Achillea's head. In their haste, they made the journey in a little over an hour, but when they reached the place where the tower had been, it was gone. Only a perfect circle of flattened shrubs and grass 30 feet across remained.
What now?
Asked Achillea. Whether she was asking Cord, Robin, or herself was unclear. Perhaps even she didn't know. Achillea's skin shone with perspiration. She was still exhausted from the journey there. All the same, she turned back and hurried all the way home, fending off panic the whole way. When she arrived, it was 3 hours before sunset. The place was exactly as she had left it, and still eerily quiet. A terrible mix of emotions vied for dominance in her mind. Worry for Aldve, fear for herself, a responsibility to do something, and a helplessness for not knowing what that was. In the end, she did the only thing she could think of and began a careful search of their home from top to bottom. I do have an idea about what has happened here, enough to drop a few clues for Achillea to discover, but it's only a half-baked idea. Aldve has been attacked, and his spellbook stolen. Something I haven't decided is if anyone would be watching Achillea. I mean, would the intruder care about her existence and leaving her as a loose end? My gut says that would have happened by now, and that she's beneath their notice. Still, I'm going to make a roll to find out for sure. A wandering encounter check feels appropriate here, so I'm rolling a d6, and on a 1, there will be some kind of threat nearby. The roll. A 6. She's alone. That makes sense to me. I doubt she'll remain so for very long. This part of the world is full of dangerous creatures, and it was only Aldve's presence that kept them at bay. Still, I've rolled, and Achillea is safe for now. I'm going to make another roll. Achillea will find 1 to 4 clues as she conducts a proper search of her home. Rolling. A 3 on the die. I know what the first one will be. In their shared bedroom, Achillea finds a few drops of blood on the books near the exploded glyph. This tells her that the intruder was some kind of, well, mortal, as opposed to a magical or supernatural creature. It's not much of a clue, but it's something. She finds a bigger clue when she brings herself to return to the basement, something that part of her resisted doing. Chapter 3. Part 2. Day 1. Evening. Mythic event meaning. Oppress allies. Party status: Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. For those hours between finding her master turned to stone and returning to the basement, now with a glowing lamp in her hand, Achillea had been able to live in a fantasy of denial, where she could imagine that her Vapi had not been turned into a statue, but had instead simply been working away downstairs in solitude. But as she descended the creaking stairs and the light fell upon his frozen gray features, she felt the wild grief and fear return once again in full. She took a deep breath and found her resolve. Hadn't Vapi given her everything she had ever needed? Now he needed her to be strong. She set about a thorough investigation, starting with the alchemist's workbench, and discovered something right away. The 2 overturned jars contained ingredients commonly used to treat poison. Snakefoot and Nightbloom, when mixed together in the correct quantities, wouldn't reverse the effects of poison, but they could slow it. Had Vapi been poisoned before being turned to stone? That was a strange thought. Perhaps there was a struggle, and these 2 ingredients were knocked off the shelf at random. No, that didn't make any sense. There were no other indications of a struggle at all down here. She replaced the jars on the shelf and slowly made her way towards the stone figure of her master. She felt terrible, impotent to help him. But there was hope, for life remained in Robin and Cord and the Oak Man. Therefore, her Vapi was not dead. She sniffed and crouched down so she was face to face with her master.
I promise, Vapi. I promise to do everything I can to help you. Oh, I wish I knew where to start.
Just then, something caught her eye. The floor of the cellar was made of packed dirt, and it appeared that Aldve had written something in it with his fingernail before he'd been petrified. She brought her light close so she could see better. There was just one word. She craned her neck forward and read it. Audok, it said.
Audok?
She breathed. That wasn't a word she knew in either the common tongue or in Elvish, and yet it rang a bell. Was it a name? She thought it might be, but couldn't quite recall. Cord might know, she thought, rising and hurrying back up the stairs. The wooden construct was there, in the kitchen, with a fire going and cooking the fish she had caught.
You're making dinner? She
asked, incredulously. Cord's shoulders didn't move up and down, so he couldn't shrug. Instead, he tilted his body from side to side in a substitute gesture Achillea knew well.
Aye.
She stopped the reprimand she'd been about to give. If making dinner made Cord feel useful, then who was she to stop him? Instead, she asked,
Do you know the word or name Audok?
Cord paused to consider, then leaned forward in a nod, holding up 2 dowel fingers to indicate that he did, and that it was the latter, a name. He glanced at the cooking fish with his painted-on eyes, and, deciding they would not burn if left unattended for a few minutes, went into the shared bedroom, beckoning for Achillea to follow. When she entered the room, Cord was bent over the pile of books, rummaging through them. Achillea waited until he found what he was looking for, a slim volume bound in red leather with a clasp of gold. He handed her the book, and she took it, opening the clasp with her slender fingers. Achillea sat on her mattress and laid the covers of the book across her thighs, flipping the pages slowly. It was a sketchbook with illustration after illustration of trees, hills, rivers, and lakes, all done in charcoal. The pictures seemed to have been done by the same skilled hand, and many of the natural places featured within the book's pages were striking or unique, either by their beauty or their shape. On the final page was an inscription. It read, I hope these poor sketches will remind you that you will always have a home in the north. It was signed, Audok.
Cord, you were right, but do you know this person?
Cord indicated that he did not. Holding the book in her lap must have reminded her of something, because Achillea suddenly made an urgent sound and stood up. She rushed back into the living room. Across from the kitchen area was a corner with 2 chairs where she and Aldve would spend hours, sitting and reading. She squatted low, moving her fingers along the wall of mortared stones. She found the loose, flat stone without having to search and wiggled it free. There was a flat rectangular cavity beyond, in which she kept her spellbook hidden. Aldve had always impressed upon her that a wizard's spellbook was their most important possession and the thing most coveted by other wizards. It represented their life's work. Her hiding spot appeared not to have been disturbed, but there was only one way to know. She thrust her hand inside and sighed with relief when her fingers touched the familiar leather cover. She drew forth the small volume and hugged it tightly to her chest. Whatever had happened here, some things were beginning to become clear. Some wizard or other had come to steal Aldve's spellbook. They had survived his glyph of protection and gotten away, but not before poisoning her master and, inexplicably, turning him to stone. It didn't fully make sense, but wizards were capricious and unpredictable, and she knew she didn't have all the clues necessary to solve the mystery. Until now, she had suspected that the wizard Fim had been the interloper, but now she wondered, could it have been this Audoc person instead? Clearly, Vapi had wanted her to know about him. Was it at all possible that Fim and Audoc were the same person? She felt tired, both physically and emotionally. Despite this, she doubted she would be able to get to sleep, and she certainly wasn't going to try to sleep in her bed beside the destroyed remains of Vapi's mattress. Feeling lonely despite the nearby presence of Cord, Achillea fetched her blanket from the bedroom and went downstairs. If she couldn't sleep, at least she could sit against the wall and hold vigil beside her master. Her lamp was still there and cast its light upon the grim face of the oak man who stared expressionlessly at her as she approached. Aldve was, as before, a stone statue, still and gray.
Why couldn't you stop this from happening?
She said to the oak man in accusation. There was no reply. The oak man had heard her, she knew, but he couldn't understand a question that complex, and he wouldn't have been able to respond, even if he could. Achillea sat down beside Aldve with her back to the wall and her knees pulled up in imitation of his posture. She didn't think sleep would come, but shortly after she snuffed out the flame of her lamp, she nodded off. Achillea woke up disoriented. This was not her bed, and this was not her room. She had been having a terrible dream. She rubbed her eyes and looked to her left, right into the frozen profile of her master. In a horrible rush, it all came back. The creepy gnome, the fat wizard, coming home to find Aldve like this. No. She stood up and backed away, as if physically distancing herself from the statue might make the truth less real. But it was real, and now, despite fighting the urge all through the previous evening, she fell onto her knees and wept freely. When there were no more tears left to cry, she wiped her cheeks and gathered her things. She would find out what had happened here, she vowed, and put wrong to right.
I swear it.
She told Aldve's stone face.
Ahea as my witness.
She went up the stairs and began to pack some things into her satchel. When Cord inclined his body in question, she told him,
We're going north. We're going to visit this Audoc and have a word with him. If he knows something, I'm going to make him talk.
After her things were packed, there was one last thing to do before she left. She sat down in her chair, opened her spellbook, and began to meditate upon the contents. I think I can count the current mythic event meaning oppress allies as fulfilled, which means I need a new one. Rolling D percentile twice. I've got 57 and 18. That gives me create and the intellectual. Okay, I could see how that might get used quite soon, actually, but not just yet. There's another roll I've been waiting to make. As a first-level magic user, Achillea gets one first-level spell. As an aside, in Tale of the Manticore, one of my house rules is that all magic users have and can use the spell Read Magic, as though it was a cantrip. So this spell is in addition to that free ability. Also, since we're on to Season 3, and since the list of level 1 spells in the BX rules is quite short, I've already used almost all of them at some point or another, and so in order to keep things interesting and fresh for myself and for long-time listeners, I've decided that here, in Zacia, wizardly practices are a bit different, and I'll be making a new list of spells to reflect that. I'll post this new list on taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com, and I'll return to it anytime I need a new spell. I'm going to populate this list with a few choice picks from the original BX list and a few new ones from AD&D First Edition. Hang on. Okay, I've got my list made and I've got a D12 ready to roll. Let's see what she gets. Rolling. A 7. That's enlarge. Interesting. Let's take a minute to see what this spell can do. It causes the target creature or thing to grow by 10% per caster level. Size and weight are both affected. Unwilling victims get a saving throw. 10%, eh? It seems at low levels, the spell is not particularly potent. The spell can be reversed, however, and this spell, Shrink, is the version I think Achillea would memorize. As a utility spell, it would allow her to carry greater quantities of things, such as water or firewood, during her daily duties. That makes sense to me. Now that I've determined her starting spell, we can move on to the task of working out Achillea's starting equipment. While she probably grossly underestimates how long she'll be gone, Achillea knows she's going to be away for at least a little while, as she seeks out this audioc. She'll pack travel supplies and hide whatever valuables she can't take with her. We can assume that she'll take a change of clothes, and there's enough preserved food in the pantry to call a week's worth of rations. A full water skin would be available. She'll take a pair of daggers and a walking stick too. Her spellbook and Audoc's sketchbook will go into her satchel, along with the various supplies ordinary to wizards. She'll also take a tinderbox and a spare blanket to use as a bedroll. Since Aldve was a fairly high-level magic user, I think it's safe to say he would have something else that would aid her, and perhaps a bit of money. Let's make it simple and say that Achillea takes 20 gold and 20 silver pieces, hiding any other valuables in her spellbook nook behind the falsely mortared stone in the living room wall. She doesn't expect to need much in the way of money, and I think she would have very little idea of what things cost anyway. The young man who drops off the supplies now and then would be Achillea's only experience with trade. But as for that other useful thing, I think a quick random table on the fly will serve. I'll roll a d4 against the following. On a 1, it will be a scroll with a first level spell on it. If she gets this, it will be assumed she has already tried and failed to copy it into her spellbook. On a 2, it'll be a scroll with a second level spell on it. On a 3, it'll be a potion to be determined at random. On a 4, a miscellaneous magic item of modest power, like a wand with only a few charges left. The roll. A 3. That's a potion. Pretty cool. Well, we know it isn't going to be a poison antidote, but it might be anything else. There's a D8 table in the BX rules I can use, and speaking of poison, I see that number 8 is exactly that. Well, I'll leave it there, but I'll also say if I do roll an 8, Achillea will know what it is. Actually, I think she'll know in any case. That only makes sense to me. The roll. A 3. Gaseous form. There's a really cool illustration in the BX rules to go along with the entry on this item. It shows an empty suit of armor on the ground, with the potion bottle toppled over beside it. A cloud of mist hovers over the armor. The thing to remember will be that if Achillea drinks this potion, her possessions will not be affected by the magic. Okay, we've got our starting spell, our travel supplies, a handful of coins, and a randomly generated magic item. I think Achillea is ready to begin her quest. Thank you for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum World Building Tool, or Encyclopedia Manticorica on DriveThruRPG. You can now buy a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. As always, my thanks to everyone for their support of the show. As you know, I like to read a listener review at the end of each episode. This one was left by Casmo205 on Apple Podcasts. Casmo205 writes, I'm pacing myself into Tale of the Manticore's second season and loving every episode. The host does a great job of balancing the different aspects of this truly unique game and strives to make every episode enjoyable. The character and world building is real. I can smell the gutters of Silmoral and feel Yellowfly's hatred of the Weeping Eye. Keep up the great work. I really appreciate the review, Casmo205. I love that you can really sense the grit and despair on the streets of Silmoral, too. It fills my heart with dark joy. Thanks very much for the review. Thanks also to Goblin's Henchman and Hodag RPG for providing conceptual and promotional art for the show. Your vision helps it to reach its full potential. There are no guest actors on today's episode, so instead of my usual thank you, let me make an invitation. I am currently in need of female voice actors, so if you're up to the task, for a role big or small, please get in touch. You can reach me at Manticore Tale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. I also keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rules.